Good morning, one and all. In this lecture, we will learn about how to install any Linux operating system on your computer. And for that, which are the different hardware requirements are required for this your Linux installation. Now, for the installation, there are different editions are available, such as desktop edition, server edition. But currently, we are talking about the desktop edition. So for the desktop edition, these are the basic hardware requirement that we required at least 2 gigahertz of dual core processor, then 2 GB of RAM, 25 GB of hard disk space should be available. VGA, it is related to your graphics card, and with a minimum at least this one as a resolution, screen resolution. Then it should have support for the CD or DVD drive or the USB port for an installer media. That we have to install it using at least DVD or any external hard disk or USB. That's why we require the port as in a DVD drive and the USB port. And about the processor, that everyone you know about the processor, what is a RAM and hard disk. So I think I should not explain all these things. So these are the minimum requirement. Suppose you want to install any desktop current version of an Linux, and we are taking distribution as an Ubuntu. In one of the slide in last lectures, I told you timeline of an Linux, how exactly it has been developed and which are the different distributions are available, such as Ubuntu, it is one of the distribution. Red Hat Linux, it is another famous distributions. Then CentOS, then Kubuntu. So these are some examples of the distribution. Among that, Ubuntu, it is very easy to use and it is very familiar to everyone. Even in a IT industry right now, Ubuntu, it is used as a desktop version for at every engineer's computer. And suppose they want to use a server, they are using Ubuntu server or Red Hat server. Now let's see other system requirements regarding the CPU. Just we have seen, but it is in a detail that CPU from Pentium 4, that is x86 based, to till the current version, and even for the different processors it is supporting, not only for the Intel but for the AMD processor or any other company's processor it is supporting. Then input output bus, just like in Windows OS, it's supposed for all the motherboard and all the system buses. So it supports the PCI, PCI Express and PCI X bus. So I'm assuming that all these your concepts are clear and I'm not utilizing a time to explain all these points. Suppose still you are having some doubt, then go to the net and search for what is this processors. If you think that your concepts are not clear, then search for all these points and study yourself. Then laptop, that it supports for the laptop means what? Laptop, it is just like your personal computer. So Linux, it is supporting for your personal computer if you have at least this minimum configuration of data, minimum configuration of your hardware. Now in every computer or the laptop right now having all this configuration, so it is supporting for the laptop. Even this Linux OS supporting for multiple processors, it should support, and it is supporting. So suppose your system is having multiple processors, then all this processor will be used if you are running multiple processes. And suppose you are running only one process, then only one processor will be used and other processes will be in idle mode, and that activity will perform by kernel. Means what? Suppose 10 processors are available. Among the 10 processors, what will happen? Suppose one process request come, then it will be allocated to one of the processor, and the 9 processor will be in a idle mode, that will be in a passive mode. So that functionality to assigning that process to the processor will be done by kernel of Linux. Then graphics hardware support, supports for the graphics hardware. So suppose you want to run some 3D hardware acceleration just like an animation, then what you have to do, then you have to install some firmware additional packages for 3D or for some higher version of your animations or the videos, then we require some add-on softwares for that. But basically, for your normal graphics, all these things are supported by any kind of Linux distribution, from Ubuntu to this CentOS or Red Hat Linux. Then network connectivity hardware, almost any NIC, that is a network interface card, is supported by the Linux kernel. NIC network interface card, it is used for your LAN connection. So I think you know about that card. It is installed in your motherboard, and with the help of that LAN port, you are able to access internet with the LAN cable. Even it supports for wireless network cards. I want to get a connection with the Wi-Fi, then also it is possible in case of Linux. So whatever the information softwares that you are accessing or the hardware supported by Windows, the same all things are supported by Linux also. Now let's see about the installation. Now, how to preparing installation, there is one point that before we should start the installation, what you have to do, that first of all you have to repartition your hard disk. Okay, so suppose you are having another OS installed. Let's take an example. This is my computer laptop, and on this laptop, suppose I already am having Windows 10, and now I want to install Linux. Then I have to partition it first. But currently, in the current Linux versions, we don't need to partition manually. That directly you can insert that DVD drive or DVD or USB, and then run that particular OS installation. Automatically, it will tell you that you can do the partition with the space, and just you have to assign the space, that how much space you want to allocate for your Ubuntu or for your Red Hat Linux, any distribution of Linux OS, then it is also possible. So repartitioning you can do previously also, before that you are doing installation, or once you start installation, there will be one pop-up menu will come that you can install manually with the help of their tool. Then second one, boot the Linux installation media. Once you have partitioning hard disk, then we have to boot it through the Linux installation media. Now, normally what happens when you start your computer, I'm having window. By default, window will be get started. Okay. So what we have to do, we have to change some BIOS setting. So I'm assuming that you know what is in a BIOS. BIOS means basic input output system. For that, what you have to do, you have to start your system through the BIOS, and through the BIOS change your setting that you should start your installation or booting from USB or from the DVD. So you will get that option in advanced option. There is one tab in BIOS. In advanced option, you can set a priority of installation, that which device should be boot first. So once you boot through the installation media, then your installation or that particular system will be run from DVD or from USB. Then just I told you that after starting the installation, we have to create the Linux partition. Now there are two file systems in Linux partition. Yes, the fourth point, that is for partitioning that primary partition and secondary partitions. And in primary partitions, we have to first of all use the boot file system as one partition, and another one space we required for the swap space. And now the Linux partition will be, once you create the Linux partition, then create the file system space and some swap space. Now this swap space, it is in a virtual space, that already this concept you have learned in an operating system syllabus, that what is in a virtual memory. What is a virtual memory? Everyone you know about the physical memory. Okay, what is a physical memory? That is your RAM. And virtual memory, that this memory, it is reserved on your hard disk itself. So swap space is nothing but one of the partition that has been kept on your hard drive. Suppose I am having a 500 GB of hard disk. Among that, I am using 100 GB of hard disk for Linux. and in that at least I should give 10 to 15 10 at least 10 GB for your swap space. Now what is the need of this virtual memory? What is the need of virtual memory? Virtual memory means whenever that physical memory is not sufficient, we require some additional memory. Then what exactly operating system or kernel does? That the processes which are currently not used and present in this particular RAM, physical memory, that will be transferred to this swap space, virtual memory, that is on a hard disk, temporarily. And another process which is having a high priority and required a RAM, that will be given the space on a physical RAM. Once that second process completes its execution, then it will be exit from the RAM, and that virtual memory process which has been kept on a hard disk, that will be again shifted back to the RAM. That is the use of the swap space. So for any operating system, we require such kind of swap space, even for the Windows, even for the Mac, and even for your Linux. That is the concept behind the swap space. And file systems, in last lecture we learned about the file systems. Which are the different file systems? What I have told you, that everything in Linux is a file. That is a slash, forward slash. Forward slash means it is a root directory, and that root directory containing other subdirectories. These subdirectories are formed as per their functionalities. So which are different file systems, such as your boot file system, then var file system, opt file system, and so on. Now these file system has to be stored in some type. For example, in case of Windows, can you tell me that which file system or which file type Windows is using? I told you in somewhere, I think in um, comparison between different OS, Windows and Linux. I have told that one point was there, file system, that window it is using FAT and NTFS file system. Okay, again in a FAT32 and FAT64, and NTFS, new technology file system, it is a current one. So new technology file system, it is used by Windows in a such a way. For the file system, it requires ext, extension file systems. It has been taken from Unix actually, and currently the extension 4 is used. So file system type will be extension 4, and your file data will be stored in that file system space. Okay, so here two spaces we have to create, and in partitions we have to create primary partition, secondary partition, that we will see later. What is this primary and what is the secondary partition? But think the sequence, that how exactly we have to install Linux OS. Then after that we can install the software on this new file system. Means suppose I want to install third party software. For example, in this semester you are learning Java programming. I want to run Java program on the Linux system. Then what I have to do? I have to download one package. Now how exactly currently you are running Java? With the help of the JDK, Java Development Kit. So this JDK I will download from the internet, and then I have to install it. JDK, then JR is required, Java Runtime Environment, for your running that particular program, and then you can compile and run that program. So once you install your operating system, then we can add different softwares. Suppose I want to install Apache. Okay, so this is another software, that is a web server. So this web server we can install once your OS get installed. So basically remember that first of all we have to partition your hard disk. C, D, E, F, already you know these logical partitions. Is it a physical one? Are we dividing a hard disk? No, it is not a physical hard disk partitioning. We are dividing hard disk logically. That is, logically we are giving some space, that this first 100 GB for C drive, next 100 GB for D drive, and so on. And then after that, boot using any DVD-ROM or boot using any USB. Then create the Linux partition, primary partition, secondary partition, and then create a file system space and swap space. And after that means you are completed, this installation has been completed, and then you can install the softwares. So let's see the Linux installation part. Now that will be covered in the next video. So I think up to this part